Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we're going to discuss one of my very favorite role-playing games, and that is Pulp Cthulhu. Published by Chaosium, Pulp Cthulhu is an add-on expansion to 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. While Call of Cthulhu focuses on investigation and horror, Pulp Cthulhu aims more towards action and adventure set in a Lovecraftian world. Our characters, which are called heroes, aren't helpless victims in the face of the mythos, but they're more inclined to go out and punch the mythos in the face. Set in the vein of Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Mummy, The Shadow, The Rocketeer, The Phantom, and Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, it features exploration, weird science, daring heroes, and, of course, action. To compare this to Call of Cthulhu, with Call of Cthulhu, I would say that the definitive modern-era movie that I would use to represent it would be John Carpenter's The Thing, starring Kurt Russell. Meanwhile, for Pulp Cthulhu, the definitive modern-era Pulp Cthulhu film would be John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China, also starring Kurt Russell. In order to play Pulp Cthulhu, you need 2 books. First, you need the Call of Cthulhu Keeper's Guide. Second, you need Pulp Cthulhu. Players will still need to know how to play Call of Cthulhu in order to play Pulp. We've played this system now for 2 years as our primary game. In fact, the original bones of this review I started writing about a year ago, but because players need to be able to play Call of Cthulhu before they could play Pulp, I decided to review Call of Cthulhu first, which is now available as a 9-part series. So most of the system should feel very familiar to players. The mechanics are pretty much the exact same. So what I'm going to do here is I'm really just going to focus on the difference between Call of Cthulhu and Pulp Cthulhu, starting with character creation. The character sheets for Pulp look pretty much the same, which is nice and familiar for players to use. But the first difference that they'll notice is archetypes. Pulp heroes each have an archetype, things like Adventurer, Femme Fatale, and Two-Fisted. Each archetype gives us several benefits. So, for example, let's say I wanted to use Hard-Boiled. The first thing that we'll see is the core characteristic, in this case, Constitution. Each archetype has a stat associated with it as its primary stat. Now what this means is that while all the stats are determined by the regular way that you do Call of Cthulhu, the core characteristic is determined differently by rolling 1d6 and adding it to 13. This gives us a range of 14 to 19, which once we multiply it by 5 comes to 70 to 95, much higher on the curve than normal stats are, and possible to be higher above the normal maximum of 90. Next, we'll look at archetype skills. We have 100 skill points to divide among these skills however we see fit. But because there's so many, in this case 12, you probably don't want to spread out that 100 points among all those skills because it's not really going to improve any of them enough. So I suggest that players choose 5 to 6 archetype skills, and those are the ones that they should pump those 100 points into. Later on in character creation, players are still going to get the normal occupational skills and special interest skills like they do in Call of Cthulhu, so your character is essentially just going to be starting off with 100 more skill points than a regular investigator would receive. Now, regular Call of Cthulhu does have something similar with their experience packages, like war experience and medical experience. However, archetypes are now something that all characters get in Pulp Cthulhu.
And players, no, you can't get the Call of Cthulhu experience package in addition to the Pulp Cthulhu archetype package. This is a replacement for, not an addition to.
The last thing we get is 2 Pulp talents. Pulp talents, for a lack of a better term, are just special abilities, and we get 40 possible Pulp talents to choose from. Most of these offer bonuses to specific skills and abilities, while others include the ability to use weird science or unlock psychic powers. The rest of character creation is pretty much the same as Call of Cthulhu, except for 2 big areas. The first is character age no longer makes any difference at all. You don't get any experience bonus for having an older character, but at the same time you don't have any penalties to your movement or other stats because you're kind of past your prime.
With Pulp heroes, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
The second big difference is hit points. While in regular Call of Cthulhu, players total their con and their size and divide that by 10. Pulp heroes divide them by 5, meaning they get twice the hit points as a regular Call of Cthulhu investigator. Character skills are pretty much the same as they are in Call of Cthulhu, except for a few individual differences. Now, a successful first aid check will heal 1d4 hit points of damage rather than just a single hit point of damage. kind of nice because we're going to be doing a lot more combat and action, and we got more hit points to heal. Cthulhu Mythos now allows as just standard as being Cthulhu Mythos Magic, which was an optional rule in Call of Cthulhu, but is now something that player characters can use and enjoy as just part of what Pulp is. Also, Hypnosis, one of the lesser known, but one of my personal favorite skills, is now even way more badass in Pulp Cthulhu than it was in Call of Cthulhu. And among its expanded abilities, which it has a few of, it includes the power to temporarily stun an opponent with a mesmerizing stare. Look into my eyes. Combat has a few changes as well. The first being that we no longer have major wounds. When a character now gets dropped below 0 hit points, they're just considered unconscious, and there's probably no more threat to their life unless an enemy coup de grace them at this point. This is less, of course, the blow that knocked them below 0 hit points did as much damage as normally what would be half their maximum hit points. In that case, the player character is unconscious and dying just like a regular Call of Cthulhu character when they're dying. And of course, one hit that does more points of damage than their normal maximum hit points of damage should be able to kill a Pulp hero outright. The second is going to be expanded rules for knockout blows. How many Pulp stories do you see where the hero sneaks up behind a guard and smacks them over the head and knocks them out? Or our hero gets knocked out and then they wake up somewhere else tied to a chair and now they have to escape. Also, we now get 2-weapon fighting.
Because you know what's better than one gun? 2 guns.
For our game, I made a handy quick reference sheet for all the combat modifiers and other rules for my players. That way, during a fight, we didn't have to slow things down and consult the book, and we could just stick to the action. I have links below for it if you would like to give it a look. So far, the changes really haven't been that dramatic, but now let's talk about one of the areas that the most changes have been made, and that is luck. In Call of Cthulhu, luck is used for various things that no skill could be used for, such as being able to hail a taxi cab at 3 in the morning in the rain in a bad neighborhood, or the ability to buy a skill roll on a 1-for-1 basis. If you rolled your roll and you failed it, you can spend some points of luck in order to make it or improve what level that you succeeded it as. And in Pulp Cthulhu, you can still do those just like you could in Call of Cthulhu, but there are a few additional things, such as being able to spend 20 points of luck in order to buy yourself 1d6 hit points, or being able to reduce the effects of sanity loss. You can now use that by spending luck points. But one of the biggest ones that they added is the ability to avoid certain death. Now, to do that, a player character must spend all of their luck, drop that to 0, and they have to have 30 points of luck before they can even try to do that. But in these cases, the player character appears to die. Whatever should have killed them, according to everybody else, it looks like it killed them. But then that player character reappears in the next scene with some sort of outlandish and wild, crazy story of how they managed to survive what would have certainly killed them.
Yeah, guys, I thought it was total Ghana too when I fell out of that airplane back there, but as luck would have it, I landed on top of a hot air balloon and it totally broke my fall. And then the captain of the hot air balloon was all like, "Oh my God, can I give you a lift somewhere?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So now here I am at our destination. Ready to get back to the adventure?
Since luck is so important in Pulp Cthulhu, the amount of luck regained between adventures goes up dramatically. Now, during the investigator development phase, the player rolls their luck. If they make the roll, scoring under their current luck, they still receive 1d10 plus 5 points. And if they roll above their luck, i.e. failing their luck roll, they now get 2d10 plus 10 luck points. However, the 99 maximum cap is still in place, so player characters better use it or lose it. Once again, I summarized all of this on a handy Lux Rule cheat sheet, which I have links below for if players would like to use that. Sanity, for the most part, is still the same and poses a great risk to your player characters. However, now some bouts of insanity may unlock special abilities, or what's called insane talents. Among these are insane skill augmentations, where a character can infuse a particular skill with the Cthulhu mythos, sort of bending the rules of the universe with this skill at the cost of more sanity. This includes abilities like bending bullet trajectories mid-air, climbing walls like a spider. This is where we start delving into some of the weirder pulp powers like you would find in the Shadow. The only problem with insane talents is that the book doesn't really tell you when a keeper should start awarding insane talents for player characters when they go insane. So for us, whenever I had a player character go insane and have their bout of madness, I had them roll a Mythos check. If they made their Mythos check, that would unlock their ability to get an insane talent. However, player characters only ever got one insane talent, so they didn't get more and more the more insane they went. They just got one, but up until then, they rolled Mythos every time they went insane. Now, it is open that they could have gotten more if there was some sort of really special circumstance involved, but most of the time, you only get one insane talent, no more than that. Now, speaking of the Mythos, another change that's been made is that reading Mythos tomes and learning Mythos spells takes about half the time in Pulp Cthulhu.
Which means less time being spent in libraries reading about monsters and alien gods and more time fighting them.
Psychic powers is another big change. Possible player character powers include telekinesis, divinations, or the ability to speak with the dead. Personally, I would have liked to have had a few more psychic powers to choose from, maybe up that to about 10 or 15 different powers. Now, powers work like skills. They do not cost sanity like Mythos spells do, but they will require some magic points, I think for all of them. But they do require that a player character invest skill points in them and have to make a skill point roll, and they can have a regular or hard or an extreme success whenever they roll their psychic power skill. Now, one big complaint that I do have about psychic powers is that the descriptions for clairvoyance and psychometry are too similar. This led to some confusion with my players, so the verdict that we made was that psychometry is opening yourself up to the psychic feelings and impressions around you. You're not necessarily looking for anything in particular, you're just opening yourself up for whatever happens to be there.
This leads to things like your player character being able to enter a bedroom somewhere and they're all like, I don't know who, but someone was murdered here.
Clairvoyance, on the other hand, is done with a specific intention of looking for something in particular, so a player character must state what it is that they're looking for whenever they use clairvoyance.
Which means your player character could walk into a room and say, this is the specific room that our client's daughter died in, because that is the specific thing that the player character was looking for.
Weird science. These are the fantastical gadgets found in pulp stories. It's your death rays, your jetpacks, your giant robots, and I love these little gadgets. In order for a player character to build or modify a weird science gadget, they must first have the weird science trait unlocked as one of their character traits. They're also going to need the appropriate skills to go with that device, such as they would need electronic repair if they're trying to do a Dick Tracy style radio watch, or if they're doing a ghost detector, you'd have to have occult as well as physics, even as well as the weird science ability in order to create a ghost detector. Now, the book does give us some sample gadgets that we can look at and we can analyze and break down how to do it, and they give some instructions on how keepers should award the difficulty levels and the different skills involved in order to make a weird science gadget. However, we only get 9 sample gadgets to look at as our examples. Personally, once again, I would have liked more. I would have liked to have had about 15. Not just to have as ready-made gadgets that I as a keeper can throw into a game without having to spend much time building them up, but also being able to look at them and break them apart and analyze them. That way, when a player is trying to ask me what sort of difficulty levels they need in order to make a science device, I can look at those examples and I can make a better guess as to how difficult I should really make it in order to keep it fair with the rest of the devices out there. NPCs are another area that's changed. Now, most NPCs and monsters are going to be completely unchanged from Call of Cthulhu, but there are 2 big exceptions. The first is mooks. Now, these are the faceless minions, your hooded cultists and goons that the player characters have to fight through, or your low-level bad guys. Now, because pulp heroes are known to punch their way through legions of low-level goons with no effort at all, mooks are now incapacitated once they reach half hit points. So they're just as effective as anybody else in combat, but you take them out once they get to half hit points. The other big change is villains. Main villains in Pulp Cthulhu are as powerful as player characters, and like the heroes, the villains should be larger-than-life characters. They have the expanded hit points, the special traits, and the luck pool to pull from in order to do different special abilities whenever they need them. My favorite of the villain luck spins is called Lookout Master. Now, this is like the hero ability to avoid certain death, and to do it, a villain has to spend their entire luck pool, drop this down to 0. But this is used in the cases when that player character, fires their gun and gets what should have been a killing blow against the villain. However, now a faceless mook jumps in the way of the bullet screaming, "Look out, master!" Now, this is going to kill the mook instantly, but it does allow the villain to live a little bit longer and hopefully escape and come back again. I have used the hell out of this ability for my pulp villains in order to keep them in the fight longer or hopefully allow them to escape so they can come back later on in the campaign. Converting Call of Cthulhu adventures. Running Call of Cthulhu adventures using Pulp Cthulhu is pretty easy. For For the most part, you just need to double the number of bad guys. If it says there should be 2 ghasts, make it 4. If it's a dozen cultists, just round that on up to 25. Powerful monsters such as Dark Young or Starspawn are already so powerful that a lot of keepers are hesitant to use those against regular Call of Cthulhu investigators. For example, a Dark Young can attack 4 times in a round, each strike doing 4d6 worth of damage, and each of those strikes could kill a regular Call of Cthulhu investigator. Now, a single Dark Young could wipe out a group of investigators in just 1 or 2 rounds. However, these aren't going to be regular investigators. These are pulp heroes, and they can take that initial hit. They can survive it, maybe not 2, but they can definitely take that first blow, and at which point they can either fight back or manage to flee for their lives, survive, and be able to come back on another day, maybe with a good plan on dealing with the bad guy. So feel free to use Mythos monsters in Pulp Cthulhu. Maybe have them on the upper level of the curve for stats instead of just going by the average, but that's really the only changes you should even make. Key villains in Pulp Cthulhu, just give them the pulp treatment, give them the extra hit points, the traits, and the luck pool, and there you go. That's how you convert them. Some published Call of Cthulhu scenarios, especially the older ones like Black Devil Mountain or Thoth Dagger, are already very combat heavy, and I personally find them a bit too combat heavy for a regular Call of Cthulhu game. But now you can just use them in Pulp Cthulhu with very little changes to make them work. Then you have things like Goodman Games' Age of Cthulhu line, which are much more combat-centric adventures than regular Call of Cthulhu adventures are, and a lot of them are just a little bit too brutal for investigators to survive. With those, I've run Madness in London Town, The Lost Expedition, and The Transatlantic Tear, all of which I left pretty much as is when I ran them with Pulp Cthulhu, with the exception of beefing the bad guy up a little bit or maybe adding a few mooks here and there. They're pretty much run as the module shows them. So keepers, just try to use your best judgment when you're converting a Call of Cthulhu scenario for Pulp Cthulhu. There's what's called a pulpometer in the Pulp Cthulhu book, so you can determine if you need to do like low pulp or high pulp or just run-of-the-mill medium pulp. And you can kind of determine what it is you need to do in order to kind of beef up a Call of Cthulhu scenario for your pulp heroes. However, if you want some pre-written Pulp Cthulhu adventures, there are 4 pre-written adventures in the Pulp Cthulhu handbook. I usually consider it a pretty big score if a rulebook gives me 1 or maybe 2 free adventures with it, but Pulp Cthulhu knocked that out of the park and gave us 4 to choose from. Now, out of those, the only one that I have run and reviewed is Waiting for the Hurricane. So keepers, you can check that review out and see what it's about if you would like to give that scenario a spin. We've also run the Pulp Cthulhu campaign, The Two-Headed Serpent, which, by the way, was awesome. We had an absolute blast with that campaign. Now, some people have asked me, which is better, Call of Cthulhu or Pulp Cthulhu? And the answer is really subjective on what it is that I'm looking for in a game. For horror games, especially one-shot games or one-shot horror games, it's going to be Call of Cthulhu all the way. Call of Cthulhu absolutely excels when it comes to horror and when it comes to one-shots. But if I'm wanting something that's got some action in it, or if I'm doing a long-running campaign with many sessions spread out, many adventures, and I'm wanting this to take a long time to do, I'm much more inclined to do that with Pulp Cthulhu because pulp heroes have a much higher chance of surviving until the end of the campaign. Does Pulp Cthulhu have to be set in the 1930s? No. The book offers the setting during the golden age of pulp, but by no means should a keeper feel that they can only play Pulp Cthulhu in the 1930s. I already mentioned Big Trouble in Little China as a great example of a modern-era pulp game, but you could easily turn a Victorian-era Cthulhu by Gaslight into steampunk, or you could do Weird West, or you could have a very stylized version of Cthulhu Invictus set during the Roman era. You can do Pulp Cthulhu in any era that Call of Cthulhu would normally take place in. Overall, I am a huge fan of Pulp Cthulhu. While I personally love the horror and the investigative aspects to Call of Cthulhu, sometimes it's just nice to mix things up and punch the bad guy in the face. Our conversion to Pulp Cthulhu is actually what's kept us playing Call of Cthulhu as long as we have, because it's opened the doors and allowed a lot of different opportunities at different styles of games that we can play. So, for any players out there, if you enjoy Call of Cthulhu, but sometimes you want a little bit more action or adventure to spice things up, I highly recommend that you give Pulp Cthulhu a look.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you want to see some more of our stuff, like RPG philosophy or reviews for any of the scenarios that were mentioned in this video, just hit that subscribe button. Until next time, heroes, you have a great day.